Have you ever wondered why the more love you offer, the farther he retreats? You give him your warmth like a hearth in winter, your attention like water to thirst, and still, he turns inward, quiet, unreachable. You stretch, soften, accommodate. You whisper, cry, plead in silence or in sobs, and still, he drifts. It is a sacred pattern older than your name, older than this life. In Jungian terms, what you see in him is a projection of your own animus, the masculine within, drawn out and lit aflame in the figure of this man. But when he withdraws, when he detaches emotionally, it is not always punishment. It is a mirror. And what that mirror reflects is your own aching need to be chosen in order to feel safe. Some women confuse pursuit with power. But the chase is not power, it is abandonment of self dressed in the illusion of devotion. And the more she chases, the more she empties. A man pulling away emotionally is not always about disinterest. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is the weight of his own shadows coming to surface, the unspoken childhoods, the buried griefs, the unhealed masculine. He may not even know it himself. The stoic silence, the emotional distance, they are armor. But they are not about you. And they are not yours to carry. He steps back into the cave, just as Jung said the ego does when confronted with the unconscious. He retreats not because your love is not enough, but because he cannot yet hold the reflection you offer. You bring him light, and light casts shadow. When he sees himself in your gaze, he also sees what he has yet to become. And not all men are ready to be witnessed without fleeing. But here is the deep wound in the feminine, the belief that if she shines brighter, stays softer, stays longer, he will return. She becomes the balm, the therapist, the redeemer. And slowly, she becomes invisible to herself. This is not love. This is forgetting. And forgetting is the root of feminine exhaustion. She forgets that her love is sacred, not transactional. That presence is not proof of her worth, and absence is not proof of its lack. She forgets that no man can complete what she has not claimed within herself. The more she chases, the more her inner masculine, her animus, grows distorted, anxious, codependent. She externalizes her power into his hands, and waits to be held. But the empowered feminine does not chase. She receives. She witnesses his retreat, and she does not collapse. She recognizes the cycle, not as personal rejection, but as the dance of polarities, the movement of individuation. She steps back, not out of pride, but out of presence. She anchors inward. She does not match his emotional absence with her own absence from self. Because she understands, love is not born from overfunctioning. It is born in being. And when he pulls away, what matters is not whether he returns, but whether she remains home within herself. Carl Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The feminine unconscious, when wounded, believes that abandonment is destiny. That the coldness of a man is her responsibility to warm. That the silence is her job to fill. But this is the trap of the unhealed, the wound of the mother archetype taken too far. The compulsion to fix, to nurture, to hold space until she bleeds. And so, when he detaches, a storm rises within her. The nervous system screams, not because of the man, but because of the ancient memory of rejection. The body remembers every time she was too much, not enough, left behind. And so she texts, calls, over-explains, performs. Not because she does not know better, but because the child within her is afraid. Afraid to lose. Afraid to be unseen. Afraid to sit in the hollow space between his departure and her own rebirth. But that hollow space, that is the portal. That space is where the woman meets herself. Where she can let go of the fantasy that if she sacrifices more, proves more, he will stay. It is in the pause where she breathes through the ache and does not reach. She lets him pull away. Not out of revenge. Not out of manipulation. But because she honors the law of energy, what flees must be allowed to flee. What returns, returns freely. This is not about games. It is about energetic truth. You are not here to convince anyone to stay. You are here to remember who you were before the chasing began. And so, the woman stands in that trembling space, the silence after the storm, the quiet after the pleading. Her hands unclench. Her breath slows. She does not run after him into the fog of his confusion. She does not lose herself tracing the outlines of his emotional absences. Because now, she knows, chasing a man who retreats is abandoning the sanctuary of her own soul. There is something sacred in restraint. To not respond from the wound, but from the self. To not seek validation in his presence, nor define rejection by his absence. Jung taught that the process of individuation, of becoming whole, begins with turning inward. And in that turning, the feminine meets the deeper truth: she was never meant to fix him. She was meant to face herself. In that silence, the inner child cries out, "Why doesn't he love me enough to stay?" But the wise woman within her, the one forged through grief, through patterns repeated until they tore, whispers back, "This is not about him. This is about where you went missing." Because you can lose yourself loving someone who doesn't know how to hold you. You can spend months, even years, performing peace, soothing storms, chasing clarity, and still never be met. The feminine wound is not only the fear of abandonment. It is the compulsion to prevent it at all costs. To preemptively fix, solve, perform. To trade sacred presence for transactional affection. To live in emotional debt, always hoping love will be returned with interest. But true empowerment does not beg to be seen. It radiates, regardless. You see, when a man pulls away, it activates not only your longing, it awakens your shadow. The place where you've tied your self-worth to being needed. The place where "I am lovable" is quietly chained to if he stays. But staying is not the same as loving. And leaving is not always a betrayal. Sometimes it's the universe saying, "This one cannot meet you yet. Not here. Not now. Not like this." And so, the question is no longer, "How do I get him back?" But rather, "Why do I disappear every time someone else does?" Because that's the deeper loss. Not his exit, but your own abandonment of you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. The Stoics knew what modern trauma teaches: regulation begins within. And the feminine, when in her power, is a master of inner regulation. Not control. Not suppression. But regulation, the art of staying with the feeling, without making it someone else's responsibility to soothe. You are not unworthy because he retreated. You are not unlovable because he went silent. You are simply standing at the threshold of your own power, a place that feels like abandonment, but is actually initiation. The feminine in her wounded state demands answers. She texts late into the night, rereads messages, rewrites reality in her mind until she's dizzy. She wants to know why. She wants to make it make sense. But the feminine in her healed state does not require closure from outside. Because she's learned that most closure comes not in explanation, but in embodiment. And embodiment means this: you stop abandoning yourself for someone else's confusion. You let them go. You stay home within. He may come back. He may not. That is not the story. The story is whether you rise, again and again, from the places where you once betrayed yourself. And perhaps, one day, he will return. He will say he was afraid. He will say he didn't know how to receive what you offered. But by then, you may no longer be waiting. Because the version of you that chased, she's no longer at the altar of his ambivalence. She has crowned herself with the quiet fire of self-worth. She has remembered that the woman who is whole does not beg to be chosen. She chooses. There is something alchemical about the woman who stops chasing. Not just magical, alchemical. Because she doesn't simply withdraw. She transforms. She stops gripping the fantasy with bloodied hands. She stops begging the universe to make it him. She starts asking, instead, what part of me believed love was earned by effort? What old wound told me I had to work this hard just to be seen? This is where healing begins, not when the man changes, but when she stops abandoning herself in his presence, and especially in his absence. Because emotional distance from a man often becomes a litmus test for a woman's nervous system. She can't sleep. She overthinks. Her stomach twists. She checks his status, analyzes tone, replays the last conversation like a film noir looped on a broken reel. But underneath it all, it's not even about him. It's about the unfinished story within her, the time Dad went cold and she felt invisible, the boyfriend who ghosted and called it confusion, the countless moments she gave her light to someone who didn't know how to receive it and thought that was love. Her body remembers. The nervous system keeps score. But healing, true healing, happens when she stops asking, why won't he pick me? And starts declaring, I no longer abandon myself in the name of hope. This is not bitterness. This is sovereignty. It is the essence of Jung's shadow integration. Because in every woman who chases is a part of her that fears what she might find in stillness. And that fear is the shadow, the disowned, unseen parts of her psyche. The parts that feel unlovable, invisible, too much, or not enough. When she runs after him, she avoids facing those shadows. When she stays with herself, she begins to integrate. The empowered woman doesn't shame the parts of her that wanted to chase. She sees them. She holds them. She says, you were trying to protect me. You were afraid I'd be left again. But we're not going to shrink anymore. We're not going to plead. We're not going to become small in the name of being loved. And so, she waits, not for him, but for herself. She waits until the compulsion softens. She waits until the anxiety alchemizes into clarity. She waits until her heart no longer beats to the rhythm of his presence. And then, something holy happens. She stops reaching. And starts rising. You see, there is a reason he pulled away. And whether that reason lies in his own trauma, immaturity, fear, or timing, it is not her burden to fix. Her only task is to witness it without collapsing. This is the feminine in her highest form, not passive, but receptive. Not reactionary, but anchored. She is water, yes, but water held in sacred form. Water that does not chase the riverbed that turns from her. She lets him go. Not because she doesn't love him, but because she loves herself more than the version of her that begs to be seen. And here lies the paradox. The woman who does not chase becomes magnetic. Not because she's playing a role, but because she's returned to her center. Because she's no longer performing for love. Because she's no longer seeking wholeness in fragments. Carl Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who she truly is not someone who waits outside herself, holding a door open for someone unsure if they want to walk through. She is not the echo of another's absence. She is not the unfinished business of a man at war with his own heart. She is her own sanctuary. She is the calm after the chaos. She is the soft refusal to lose herself again. And as she reclaims her energy, the world shifts. She walks differently. Speaks differently. Not louder, but more clearly. She no longer asks, am I too much? She asks, does this connection honor my nervous system, my soul, and my becoming? She becomes unshakable, not because pain has never touched her, but because she no longer lets it define her movements. The man who pulled away may feel the shift. He may wake in the middle of the night wondering why the energy changed. He may reach back. Or he may not. But it no longer matters. Because she is not orbiting him anymore. She is rooted. And from that rootedness, she blooms. To bloom without needing to be watered by anyone else, that is the true freedom. And she learns this not through theory or romantic ideals, but through fire. Through absence. Through silence. Through the agonizing beauty of letting someone walk away and not making it mean she is unworthy of being loved. This is the woman reborn from the ruins of her own overgiving. The woman who has seen herself contort, plead, and bend until breaking, and has chosen never again. Because she has felt the ache of chasing a man who does not know how to stand still, and she has survived it. There is something unspoken in her now, something immovable. Not hardened, not cold, but clear. She does not ask for less than emotional presence. She does not negotiate with ambiguity. She does not build temples around men who bring only breadcrumbs and confusion. Because she knows, what a man does when he feels something real will always tell the truth of where he is in his journey. If he pulls away in the face of intimacy, it is not because she is too much, it is because intimacy demands inner work. It demands he meet not only her, but himself. And many men, uninitiated, fragmented, still lost in the labyrinth of ego, are terrified of that kind of meeting. So when he disappears, when he goes quiet, when his eyes no longer hold you in the same sacred stillness, know this, you have not failed. You have simply crossed a threshold that he has not yet learned to walk through. Let him go. Without shrinking. Without blaming. Without needing to rewrite yourself into something smaller, safer, or sweeter. Let him go, because every time you choose yourself in the face of emotional uncertainty, you are healing not only your own lineage, but the collective feminine wound that said your value was in being chosen. The woman who stops chasing begins to feel her own energy returning. Her skin changes. Her posture shifts. She no longer leads with desperation masked as devotion. She no longer gives her softness to those who mistake it for weakness. She no longer invests in potential, she mirrors presence. And in that presence, she becomes luminous. You see, feminine energy does not need to be loud to be powerful. It needs to be embodied. It is not in the words she speaks to explain her worth, it is in the fact that she no longer feels the need to. This is the essence of divine detachment. She doesn't detach out of bitterness, she detaches out of wisdom. Because she's realized that closeness without clarity is not intimacy. That chemistry without commitment is not fate. That longing without reciprocity is a form of self-abandonment. So she grieves, not just the man, but the version of herself that waited for him to awaken. She holds ceremony for the girl who thought love meant proving. She lays to rest the belief that she had to be more lovable, more understanding, more patient, just to be met. And from the ashes of that girl, the woman rises. She moves through the world with sacred slowness now. She doesn't rush love, doesn't chase signs, doesn't decode mixed signals like gospel. She honors herself by trusting what is clear and walking away from what isn't. If he pulls away again, she no longer spirals. She no longer makes it a referendum on her value. She simply observes, feels the sting, breathes, and lets it move through her without attaching to the story that she is losing something essential. Because nothing essential can be taken from the woman who no longer gives herself away. And yes, sometimes he comes back. When he's grown. When he's softened. When he's done the work. And she may choose him then. Or she may not. Because love is no longer the ultimate prize, clarity is. Mutuality is. Peace is. This is not the fairy tale ending. This is the sovereign ending. The kind that doesn't need a man returning to be complete. The kind that bows to her own journey, every heartbreak, every overreach, every soft whisper she once silenced for the sake of keeping someone close. And in that bowing, she reclaims every piece of herself she once handed away. There comes a day when the storm inside quiets. Not because the world has changed, not because he returned, not because all the questions were answered, but because she no longer needs the answers. She no longer needs the closure wrapped in someone else's epiphany. She has become the closure. She is the ending and the beginning, the question and the response. When a man pulls away emotionally, the unhealed feminine once collapsed. She would rush in to soothe, to explain, to mold herself into something more palatable, less intimidating, more digestible for his wounded masculine. But now, she sees the truth in his distance. It is not rejection. It is revelation. A glimpse into his inner architecture. And perhaps the most radical act of feminine power is this: to stop knocking on doors that do not open. To stop feeding the void with her softness. To stop offering loyalty in response to confusion. You see, the woman who chases is still trying to control. She doesn't know that yet. She thinks she's loving, thinks she's showing devotion. But deep underneath, she fears that if she doesn't hold everything together, it will fall apart. That if she doesn't pursue him, she'll be forgotten. That love is something she must maintain through effort, not something that flows from reciprocity. And that belief, that subconscious narrative, is a form of inner war. A war between the girl who was never fully seen and the woman who now demands to be. But that war ends the day she stops dancing for crumbs. The day she closes the screen, silences the overthinking, and sits with herself. The day she chooses presence over performance. There is a stillness that only comes when you stop running. A stillness that is not the absence of love, but the beginning of it. And in that stillness, she finally hears what was always beneath the noise. Her own voice. Her own knowing. Her own radiant, unbending worth. And perhaps that's what the chase was always distracting her from, her own becoming. She starts to notice things now. How her body tenses when she's near someone who cannot hold her. How her heart speeds up not from passion, but anxiety. How the longing wasn't always for him, but for a version of herself she thought only love could awaken. But now she knows, that version of her doesn't live in his arms. She lives within. She is not waiting in his text, in his tone, in the timing of his return. She is waiting in her breath, in her spine, in the sacred no that protects the sacred yes. And from that place, she becomes deeply discerning. Not guarded, not cold, but discerning. Because the woman who no longer chases begins to attract on an entirely different level. She no longer magnetizes from lack, but from wholeness. She doesn't look for sparks in men who fear fire. She doesn't pour into cups with holes in the bottom. She doesn't rehearse worthiness through overfunctioning. And as her energy returns home, she begins to live differently. She says no with clarity, not guilt. She says yes with joy, not pressure. She chooses slowness over urgency, presence over potential, and peace over performance. The woman who no longer chases is not bitter. She is not closed. She is clear. And that clarity becomes her compass. It leads her not to fairy tales, but to partnerships rooted in truth. To spaces where she doesn't have to translate her value, where love is not a maze but a mirror. A mirror that reflects not the wounds she must fix, but the wholeness she has claimed. Some men will not know what to do with her clarity. They will mistake it for arrogance. They will say she is too much. They will try to pull her into their chaos again. But she will not bend. Because she remembers the cost of losing herself. And once a woman remembers that, truly, deeply remembers, she does not forget. She does not beg. She does not chase. She does not compromise her light for someone afraid of the sun. She becomes the sun. And the world rearranges itself around her warmth. And now, she walks not to be followed, but because the path is hers. There is no longer a question of, will he come back, or did I do something wrong? Those questions have dissolved in the fire of her reclamation. what remains is not a wound, but a field. A wide, open, sacred expanse within her that once sought completion in another, and now blooms simply because she is. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the path not of becoming someone's, but of becoming yourself. Entire. Integrated. Whole. No longer half a soul waiting to be found, but a full soul no longer willing to be lost. She does not hate the man who pulled away. She honors him, in a way, for he was the mirror. He revealed the fracture. He stirred the ache that brought her to herself. For some women, the man who withdraws is the first time she realizes how deeply she still equates emotional distance with personal failure. But the woman who evolves through that pain? She learns to let absence be a teacher. Not all lessons come wrapped in tenderness. Some arrive as silence. Some arrive as him turning cold. But even those lessons are sacred. And now, she no longer rushes to interpret his retreat. She doesn't call it rejection. She doesn't label it cruelty. She simply sees it for what it is, a moment in time when two souls no longer met in resonance. She releases the fantasy that love must be salvaged at all costs. She no longer sacrifices her well-being on the altar of what could be. She understands that love, true love, is not found in suffering, but in being met. And in that understanding, she stops offering explanations for her standards. She doesn't justify her boundaries. She doesn't soften her truth to soothe fragile egos. She simply lives in alignment. And alignment speaks louder than apology ever could. The man who once left may return. And if he does, he may find a woman who still holds compassion, but not availability. He may find that the warmth she once poured endlessly now flows inward, lighting up the roots of her own becoming. He may find her in bloom, not bitter, not closed, but elevated. And he may not recognize her. Because she no longer chases. She no longer waits. She no longer dims her fire in hopes of being held. She has become the container for her own radiance. This is the feminine in full return. Not desperate. Not demanding. Devoted, but only to truth. Committed, but only to alignment. Loving, but never again at her own expense. And as she walks, others begin to feel it. Her energy enters rooms before she does. She is the calm in the chaos. The storm that does not chase. The invitation to rise, not a plea to stay. And to the women still hurting, still hoping, still hovering at the edge of themselves in pursuit of someone else's presence, she does not offer advice. She offers example. She shows them what it looks like to return. To stop waiting. To stop proving. To stop believing that her worth lives in someone else's eyes. Because it never did. It never will. She no longer builds homes and people. She is the home. And from that home, she chooses. She does not chase. She does not cling. She does not convince. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.